The alarms were the first thing Jack heard before he woke. They were sharp, mechanical, and far too close, and when he opened his eyes, the world was nothing but cold steel and blinding white light. His arms were bound, his head was pounding, and the stale air smelled of oil and something acrid that stung his throat. A low hum ran through the walls, like a giant machine breathing. Wherever he was, it wasn't Earth. He tried to move, but the cuffs dug into his wrists, and the metal bench beneath him was slick with condensation. Across from him, cages lined the walls, each one holding a figure, some human, some not. Their shapes were strange, elongated limbs, scaled skin that shimmered faintly, faces that seemed too sharp or too soft. They were all silent, watching him, but not with fear. With calculation. The door at the far end hissed open. Two figures entered, towering and inhuman. Their armor gleamed like wet stone, segmented and curved. Their eyes glowed faintly through masks that looked more like skulls than helmets. They moved with a heavy grace, and between them, something floated, a spherical drone, scanning with a quiet pulse of blue light. Jack swallowed. He knew who they were. Raiders. The taller one spoke, its voice filtered and metallic. Human pilot. Asset classification, expendable. They didn't ask questions. They grabbed him by the shoulders and hauled him upright. He stumbled, but his boots scraped against metal, gravity, weak but present. They pushed him into the corridor, and his mind reeled at the sight outside the door. The corridor stretched endlessly, but the walls were alive. Pipes throbbed faintly as if carrying blood instead of coolant. Sparks leaped from damaged conduits. Beyond the thin viewports, a dying star burned, a swollen, angry red orb throwing storms of light against the hull. And there, anchored to its death glow, was the ship. It wasn't a ship, Jack realized. It was a fortress. Hundreds of kilometers long, its bulk carved into jagged layers like a broken sword, bristling with antennas, spires, and weapon bays. The prison ship of the raiders, a place whispered about by mercenaries and smugglers, the kind of place no one left alive. They brought him to a cell. It was larger than he expected, a half-circle chamber with low light and walls covered in alien markings. But it was the figure inside that caught his attention. She was small compared to the raiders, maybe a head shorter than him, her posture tense but defiant. Her skin was a muted silver blue, patterned like veins of crystal across her arms. Her eyes, striking, luminous gold, followed every movement of the guards. When they shoved Jack inside, the door sealed with a thud. She didn't speak at first, only studied him. Then, in halting but clear standard, she said, "You're not like the others." Jack rubbed at his wrists where the cuffs had been. "I could say the same about you." Her mouth curved, not quite a smile. "They keep humans here rarely. You're either dangerous or unlucky. Bit of both." The hum of the ship filled the silence, but Jack felt her gaze linger. She was assessing him, not as a threat but as a variable. Then she stepped closer, and he saw the faint scarring along her temple, old burns hidden under metallic strands of hair. "My name is Sophie," she said. "You'll want to remember it. If you plan to get out alive." He laughed, though it came out dry. "And here I thought escape was impossible." "It is," she said, turning away. "Unless you know the right corridors. Unless you've mapped them." Something about the way she said it caught him off guard. He followed her glance toward the corner of the cell where the wall seemed scratched. At first, it looked random, but as his eyes adjusted, the lines formed patterns, grids, pathways, little notes etched into the metal with something sharp. Jack's pulse quickened. "You've been planning this," he said. "For months," Sophie replied. "This ship is failing. The star is tearing at its hull, the systems glitch, and their attention is divided. But I can't do it alone." And now, her eyes met his, steady and deliberate. "Now I don't have to." Before he could answer, the lights flickered, and somewhere deep in the ship, a muffled boom rattled the floor. Sirens wailed again, and the drone outside their cell shifted its focus. Sophie stepped closer, voice low. "When the next alarm comes," she said, "we move. There's a weapons cache 3 corridors down. But there's more to this than escape. They don't know what I have." "What do you mean?" Jack asked. She didn't answer right away, but the flash of something hard in her golden eyes told him enough. "You'll see," she said. "But if you choose to follow me, there's no turning back. They'll hunt us to the ends of the stars." Jack exhaled, feeling the weight of his own pulse. He looked at the door, then back to Sophie. "Sounds better than rotting in here." Her smile, this time, was sharper. "Good. Then when the lights go out, stay close. And whatever happens, don't stop running." The alarms stopped as suddenly as they had started, replaced by the steady thrum of engines and the low hum of artificial gravity stabilizing. Jack leaned back against the wall, staring at the scratched diagrams Sophie had etched into the metal. They were crude but precise. Every line represented a hallway, a junction, a possible dead end. This wasn't the work of someone desperate, this was planning, months of patience distilled into steel. Sophie stood at the far corner, her hands clasped behind her back, as if waiting for something only she could sense. Her gaze stayed fixed on the thin strip of lights that ran across the ceiling. When the ship shifted slightly beneath their feet, she moved closer to him. "They rotate patrols every 2 hours," she said, her voice low but steady. "But the system is old. When the power surges, some doors fail. That's our opening." Jack raised an eyebrow. "And how do you know so much about their ship?" A flicker of something unreadable crossed her face. "I was here long before you were. My people, we've learned to survive in places like this. And this isn't my first capture." Jack studied her, but before he could ask more, the lights flickered. The floor shivered underfoot as a distant explosion rocked the ship. Klaxons blared, more urgent this time, and the sphere-shaped drone outside their cell darted down the hallway. "That's it," Sophie said. "Stay close." The cell door shuddered. A grinding noise filled the chamber, and then, mercifully, it slid halfway open before jamming. Sophie darted forward, slipped through the gap like water, and gestured for him to follow. Jack hesitated only a moment before forcing himself through, scraping his shoulder against the sharp edge of the frame. The corridor outside was chaos. Sparks showered from broken conduits, the scent of burning insulation filled the air, and distant shouts echoed along the curving halls. 2 prisoners, a pair of scaled reptilian creatures, rushed past them, eyes wild. Sophie grabbed Jack's sleeve and pulled him in the opposite direction. "Why not follow them?" he asked. "Because they'll head for the escape pods. That's suicide. Raiders shoot them down first." They ran through a narrow passage, Sophie leading with confidence, twisting through sharp turns. The sound of boots pounded behind them, heavy and fast. Jack risked a glance and saw a pair of guards, their weapons glowing faintly blue. A shot hissed past, searing the wall inches from his head. Sophie didn't slow. "Left," she barked, and Jack followed, nearly slipping on a puddle of coolant. They barreled into a wider corridor lined with storage lockers. Sophie stopped suddenly, crouched near the wall, and pressed her palm against a faint panel almost invisible to the untrained eye. With a click, the wall hissed open, revealing a narrow maintenance shaft barely wide enough to crawl through. "In," she ordered. Jack didn't argue. He shoved himself into the shaft, feeling the rough edges scrape against his arms as Sophie sealed it behind them. The noise of boots thundered past outside. Inside the shaft, it was dim and cramped. The air was warmer, carrying the scent of grease and old metal. They crawled in silence, Sophie's movements precise and deliberate. Jack, struggling to keep up, finally muttered, "You really do know your way around." "I told you," she said. "I've been here long enough to memorize every failing system. But I'm not doing this just to escape. Jack kept his eyes on her boots ahead of him. That thing you said. Something you have. What is it? There was a pause, then Sophie's voice softened. Information. Stolen from the Empire's core worlds. A list of their fleets, their hidden stations, their weaknesses. It's not just escape for me. If this gets out, they burn. Jack let out a low whistle. So that's why they want you alive. No, she said flatly. They want me dead. They can't risk this data reaching anyone. Before Jack could respond, Sophie stopped abruptly. They had reached a vertical shaft, the ladder leading up into darkness. A faint glow pulsed somewhere far above. Sophie looked back at him. This leads to a weapons cache. We'll need it. She started climbing. Jack followed, the weight of her words sinking in. She wasn't just a prisoner. She was a rebel with a loaded gun aimed at the galaxy's throat. Halfway up, the lights above flickered, and Jack heard a sound, a mechanical whirring, sharp and predatory. He froze. What's that? Sophie didn't look down. Drones. Automated defense. If they find us in the shaft, we won't have a chance. As if summoned, a faint red glow lit the walls below. A drone's eye, scanning. Jack's heart slammed against his ribs. He climbed faster, trying to keep his breathing quiet. The whirring grew louder, closer. Sophie reached the top first and pressed her hand to a panel. The hatch above groaned and opened just enough for her to slip through. Move, she urged. Jack scrambled after her, feeling the air shift as the drone's sensors fixed on him. He threw himself through the hatch, and Sophie slammed it shut. The hum of the drone faded as they collapsed onto a cold floor. They were in a small room, lined with lockers and crates. Sophie stood quickly and opened one. Inside were weapons, sleek rifles, handguns, alien tech bristling with strange attachments. She tossed Jack something that looked like a compact shotgun with a glowing core. It's crude but effective. Point and pull. Jack gripped the weapon, still catching his breath. So this is where the real fight starts. Sophie's golden eyes glinted. This was the easy part. The room was quiet for only a heartbeat before the distant tremor started again, a deep vibration that rattled the lockers and sent a shiver through the floor. Sophie moved with quick precision, strapping a slim blade to her thigh, slinging a rifle across her back, and checking the charge on a weapon that hummed with alien power. She moved like someone who had done this before, her motions smooth and certain, while Jack tried to shake the numbness from his fingers as he inspected the shotgun-like weapon. It was heavier than it looked, its barrel etched with glowing lines that pulsed faintly like veins. "You're sure these will work?" he asked, his voice low but sharp. "They're the Raiders' own tools," Sophie said without looking at him. "They work too well. Which is why we move fast. The moment they realize this cache is breached, they'll flood the halls." She tossed him a small, disc-like device. "Charges. Stick it to a wall, press the center. Don't be near it when it goes off." Jack stared at the device, then shoved it into his jacket. "Right. And here I thought today was going to be simple." "You thought wrong," she said, glancing at the map she'd scratched into her arm guard. "We have 2 stops before we even think about escape. One is power control. Without killing lights and cameras, we're walking targets. The second," she hesitated, the weight of the pause heavy. "The second is a relay core. That's where I send the data. Without it, everything I stole dies here." Jack considered this, the weight of the task settling over him like cold metal. "So not just running. We're crippling an empire." "That's the idea," Sophie said. "But first, we survive the next 10 minutes." They left the cache quickly, the door sealing behind them. The corridors ahead were dimmer, power flickering in uneven bursts, throwing shadows across twisted pipes and panels. The ship groaned around them like some ancient creature struggling to breathe. Twice they ducked into alcoves as patrols thundered past, armored raiders moving in formation, their voices guttural and sharp. Not all the inhabitants were soldiers. Once, they passed a pair of prisoners huddled in a corner, one with translucent skin and luminous organs visible beneath, the other a short creature with too many eyes. They stared at Jack and Sophie as they slipped past, but made no move to follow. Sophie kept her rifle angled low, her steps silent and sure. Jack followed, matching her pace, his senses sharp. The weight of the weapon in his hands was a strange comfort, it felt almost alive. The first firefight happened without warning. They turned a corner and nearly collided with a squad of guards, 3 of them, each towering and broad, their faces hidden behind bone-white masks. For a second, everything froze. Then one of them roared, a sound like metal tearing, and brought up its weapon. Down! Sophie shouted, already firing. The rifle barked once, a sharp crack, and the lead guard stumbled back, his armor glowing where the shot hit. Jack reacted on instinct, raising the alien shotgun and pulling the trigger. The weapon kicked hard, and a sphere of crackling energy leapt from the barrel, striking the nearest guard and sending him crashing into the wall. The last one charged, swinging a blade-like arm, and Sophie sidestepped, firing point blank. The corridor went still. Jack's breath came fast, his hands trembling slightly as he stared at the bodies. "I'm not sure I'll ever get used to that." "You don't have to," Sophie said, reloading smoothly. "Just stay alive long enough to leave." They kept moving, and soon they reached the power control chamber. The door was sealed, but Sophie knelt and worked quickly at the panel, her fingers moving with precision. Sparks danced as she bypassed circuits. Jack stood guard, the distant sound of alarms growing louder. "Why are you helping me?" he asked finally, unable to keep the question down. "You barely know me. You could have done this alone." Sophie's eyes didn't leave the panel. "No one escapes alone. Besides, you were caught because you were a pilot, right? I'll need one." The lock clicked, and the door slid open. Inside, the chamber glowed with shifting lights, conduits running like exposed nerves along the walls. Sophie moved straight to a central console, typing quickly, while Jack covered her. Red warning symbols began flashing across the screens as systems failed. "They'll know we're here," Jack warned. "They already do," she replied. "But by the time they reach us, the cameras will be blind." Something shifted behind them, a sound like claws scraping metal. Jack turned just as a creature dropped from the ceiling, a small, wiry thing with too many limbs and a mouth full of serrated teeth. It lunged. Jack fired, the blast slamming it against the wall, but not before its screech cut through the chamber like a blade. Sophie's hands moved faster. "Done. We move now." Relay cores 2 levels up. They sprinted from the chamber, the lights around them now dead, corridors cloaked in shadow. The ship felt more dangerous without light, every sound amplified, every shadow a threat. Twice more they ran into drones, sleek things with glowing eyes, but Sophie's shots were unerring, and Jack's shotgun kept them at bay. At the base of the ladder to the relay level, they stopped, both breathing hard. Sophie glanced up, her expression unreadable. "This next part is worse. They'll throw everything at us now." Jack tightened his grip on the weapon, meeting her gaze. "Then we throw it right back." She almost smiled. "Good answer." They climbed, and the ship seemed to shudder around them, as if aware of their defiance. Somewhere above, alarms wailed like an animal in pain. And below, a sound rose, a low, steady rumble of boots and machinery, the raiders gathering. When they reached the top, Sophie pushed open the hatch, and a flood of light met them. The relay core waited beyond, a vast chamber filled with humming towers, glowing data streams running like rivers of light. And standing between them and the console were more guards than Jack cared to count. Sophie raised her rifle, calm as ever. "Welcome to the hard part." The relay chamber was like nothing Jack had seen before. It stretched higher than a cathedral, columns of humming machinery rising into darkness, their surfaces covered in streams of alien glyphs that pulsed like veins of light. The air was thick with the hum of power, a steady vibration that settled in his bones. And across the open floor, an entire squad of raiders waited. Their armor gleamed like obsidian, and their weapons burned with a blue glow. In the center stood one larger than the rest, its mask carved with cruel edges, its stance rigid with authority. Sophie's rifle came up without hesitation. "They know what I carry," she said quietly, her voice calm. "And they'll die before they let it leave this ship." Jack swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the shotgun in his hands. "So what's the plan?" "Fight our way through." "Fight, and move," she said. "Cover me when I run." "The console's at the far end." "I need 30 seconds. 30 seconds in a war zone," he muttered, but he nodded. "Got it." The first shot came from the raiders. A blast of blue energy screamed past, exploding against the wall and showering them with sparks. Sophie ducked and returned fire, the crack of her rifle sharp and clean. Jack leaned out and fired the shotgun, the burst of plasma scattering two of the raiders, their armor hissing where it struck. The air filled with the smell of ozone and scorched metal. "Move!" Sophie shouted, sprinting toward the nearest cover, a thick pillar humming with power. Jack followed, keeping low as more shots lit the chamber in brief flashes of blue and white. The raiders advanced, disciplined and silent, but Sophie moved like water, every motion deliberate. She picked off one soldier, then another, never stopping, always pressing forward. They were halfway across the room when the leader raised its hand. The floor shook as a massive drone descended from the ceiling, a sphere bristling with weapons, its eye a single burning red light. It pivoted toward them, charging a beam that lit the chamber in a harsh glow. Jack swore. "What's that?" "Guardian drone," Sophie said. "Don't let it line up a shot." They split, Sophie veering left, Jack right. The beam fired, slicing through the air where they had been, melting a line of metal across the floor. Jack rolled behind a crate and slammed a charged disc onto the side, pressing the center. The device blinked once, then began to pulse. "Cover," he yelled. Sophie ducked, and the explosion tore through the side of the crate, sending shrapnel and a shockwave that knocked two raiders off their feet. The Guardian drone wavered, its aim disrupted. Sophie seized the moment, firing a burst directly into its sensors. The light in its eye flickered, but it wasn't down yet. "Keep it busy," she shouted, darting toward the console. Jack drew its attention, firing again and again, each blast forcing the drone to pivot, its beams cutting through pillars and sending fragments clattering. The raiders regrouped, their shots tightening, but Jack kept moving, weaving between cover, his lungs burning. Sophie reached the console and slammed a small device into its port. Lights cascaded across the interface, alien glyphs racing like a storm. Her fingers moved fast, inputting codes, her voice steady even as fire rained around her. "Almost there, hold them." Jack's weapon burned hot in his hands. He ducked behind a column, popped up, and fired. One raider dropped. Another stepped forward, its blade arm swinging. Jack kicked a fallen weapon up and caught it, a sleek pistol, and fired point blank. The raider collapsed, its mask shattering. The drone roared, a sound like tearing metal, and charged again. Jack dove aside, the beam scorching the floor inches from his head. He rolled, came up on one knee, and fired his last charge straight into its exposed core. The blast hit home. The drone shuddered, screamed in a sound that shook his teeth, and then exploded in a rain of metal and sparks. Silence followed, broken only by the hiss of damaged systems. Sophie turned from the console, her device still glowing. "It's done," she said. "The data's gone, transmitted. Every rebel cell will know. They can't hide anymore." Jack stood, breathing hard, sweat and ash on his face. "Then let's finish this and get out." They ran, not bothering to be quiet now. The ship shook violently, alarms shrieking, systems failing. They were deep in the belly of a dying fortress, and now it knew its secrets had been stolen. Twice more they fought through patrols, but the raiders were scattered, their commands fractured. Somewhere distant, a dull roar suggested fires spreading through the decks. When they reached the hangar, Jack stopped short. Rows of ships lined the bay, but many were half broken or sealed. The room was eerily empty except for one sleek vessel at the far end, a small craft, clearly designed for speed. Sophie didn't hesitate. That one. They sprinted, the hum of the dying star vibrating through the walls. Behind them, footsteps pounded. Raiders were coming. Jack threw himself into the pilot's seat, hands moving automatically over unfamiliar controls. The systems were alien, but flight was flight. Sophie sealed the hatch behind them and strapped in. "They're almost here," she said. Jack grinned despite himself. "Then let's not be." The engines roared to life, a deep, resonant sound that shook the deck. As the raiders burst into the hangar, weapons raised, the small craft lifted, tilted, and shot forward. Blasts of energy followed, some grazing the hull, but then the hangar mouth opened, and they were free, out into the void, the dying star painting everything in crimson light. The ship shuddered as Jack pushed it harder, threading through debris and wreckage. Behind them, the prison ship loomed, wounded and burning, but still massive. Alarms rippled across its surface, and for a moment, Jack thought it might still catch them. But then a ripple ran through its hull, a fracture, deep and final. The ship trembled like a beast in pain, and then it tore itself apart. The explosion was silent in the void, a bloom of light against the star's fury. They didn't speak for a while. The only sound was the hum of the engines and the occasional soft beep of the craft's systems. Finally, Sophie leaned back, closing her eyes. "It's done. They'll come for us, but their secrets are out now. The rebels will have a chance." Jack looked at her, the alien patterns on her skin catching the fading light. "And what about us?" She opened her golden eyes, tired but steady. "We keep running. We fight when we must. But today we survived." Jack allowed himself a small, tired laugh. Not bad for a pilot and a rebel. She almost smiled. Not bad at all. The ship turned away from the dying star, engines flaring brighter as it carried them into the dark. For now, they were free, fugitives with the galaxy at their backs and a war ahead. But in that quiet moment, as the prison ship's remains faded to specks behind them, freedom was enough.